Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about The Super Cops from 1974. The Super Cops really wasn't regarded as a major film at the time of its release, but because of age and its influence on a particular modern cinematic classic, it has actually aged into being a more interesting cinephile find than it probably was actually seeing this movie in the theaters in 1974. So let me explain. Basically, this film is based on the book The Super Cops, the true story of the cops called Batman and Robin, and it's based on the real-life stories of the NYPD officers David Greenberg and Robert Hance, I believe, who were lauded by the police commissioner, and they had a record amount of arrests, 660 arrests in 4 years and a 97% conviction rate, which is, you know, I don't really know much about like police statistics or something, but that sounds good. So at first you might be like, well, why would you be talking about this movie? First off, it's directed by Gordon Parks, who previously, before this, directed Shaft, The Learning Tree, and, well, it goes The Learning Tree, Shaft, and then the sequel, Shaft's Big Score. He did not direct Shaft Goes to Africa. It's interesting because you wouldn't really expect a director mostly known for blaxploitation to be directing a film about, you know, two cops and how great they are, which seems particularly odd. And probably the bigger reason, and the actual reason I saw this, was because it was a major influence on Edgar Wright, particularly when he was making the film Hot Fuzz. And I've seen it twice because of him. I saw it once through Netflix, and then I saw it again when he hosted Turner Classic Movies, presented some films, and I actually sort of forgot this was on my DVR, and I was like, oh, Super Cops, I remember this was fun, and then found out he was the guest programmer and talked about it. I think Super Cops could probably best be described as a lark of a movie. You're kind of just having a good time, but because of seeing a version of Brooklyn, New York, particularly right around this area, not this exact location, but there are locations that I could, within a half-hour walk to, I guess, from here, and seeing them from the 70s, and the kind of sort of cinema verite style going on throughout it, with two incredibly charismatic lead performances by Ron Liebman and David Selby that really make this film incredibly enjoyable and very pro-police at a time, or at least system of police at a time of very cynical and dark 70s films. It's sort of a contradiction in a lot of things, and a weird find and weird connections to a lot of things, but it still is a really enjoyable, fun kind of 70s cop movie at a time when most people were dealing with their existential dilemmas. It's cool to watch a movie about two cops just kind of doing the right thing and doing it in an incredibly fun way. Super Cops is, of course, the real-life story of Hans and Greenberg, and how as soon as they graduate through the New York City Police Academy and become police officers, they're already trying to get to work as soon as possible. They almost immediately go to Coney Island disguised as Texaco attendants and start busting people, and they're really vigilant about it. They eventually are moved to a particular area in the Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood of Brooklyn. They go and try to clean up the neighborhood and clean up particularly the drugs that are going on around their precinct, and kind of overdo it in terms of cops at a time when most cops are paid off and lazy and not doing as much about New York's crazy crime rate which was going on at the time. We see Greenberg and Hance eventually get nicknamed the names of Batman and Robin because of their perceived superhuman abilities to clean up the streets and take down criminals and drug pushers, particularly ones that are pushing drugs towards children. Or they say that. You don't like see that, but they say that a lot. I've never seen a drug dealer who's like specifically like, my target audience is children. Like, people always say that. I've never seen that in my life. I've seen drug dealers appealing to like adults, but usually there's like a kid drug dealer, but maybe they're employing them. I don't know. It's just like a theory everyone has. I think it makes it sound worse than like, these adults are doing drugs, and people are like, yeah, these children, you're like, whoa, drugs are evil. How this film certainly, and probably why most of you watching will be interested in this, I assume, is because of its connection to Hot Fuzz, and particularly Edgar Wright played this film at the New Beverly, I believe, or at least played it with Quentin Tarantino in attendance, and Quentin Tarantino had actually never seen it, and he actually admits to stealing a line from this and putting it in Hot Fuzz. Edgar Wright actually apologized to the screenwriter Lorenzo Semple Jr., and the line, of course, is Simon Pegg's character. They said, when do you start? And he says, tomorrow. And that's in this, when they dress up as Texaco guys, they say the same thing when they arrest these guys and bring them in, because they're so overzealous. And I can honestly see that connection, because in that film, Simon Pegg is very very overzealous police officer. Although in Hot Fuzz it's kind of making fun of the fact, in Super Cops it's really going towards it. No real cynicism about what they're doing and overbearingness. No, certainly the neighborhood in Hot Fuzz, it's kind of a joke. This police officer is really like trying to bust people when there's no crime, whereas in Super Cops there's like a ton of crime, and it totally like makes sense. I think that says a lot about what Gordon Parks is doing in this, and kind of maybe a criticism I have of Gordon Parks, but also I think Gordon Parks is a good director. He's obviously made a film like Shaft that is always within the cultural zeitgeist, and you know, The Learning Tree, which is considered an important film, which I seriously probably should see. And Gordon Parks is a major figure, the first African-American photographer for Life magazine apparently, and everything like that. The interesting thing about him is when you compare Shaft to most blaxploitation, I know this isn't a review of Shaft, but this connects, so just go with me. Shaft is a private dick who, you know, not only gives sex to all the chicks, but he is part of the system. And if you watch any other blaxploitation film, Superfly, Coffee, anything like that, it usually is about a criminal or someone on the outskirts of society. It's not about a police officer. And it's interesting that Shaft is considered the blaxploitation movie. You know, if you say blaxploitation, you almost think of Shaft, but Shaft is almost not typical within that genre. And I think Gordon Parks doesn't believe in every police officer, or at least from these films I've seen that he's directed, I don't think he trusts every cop. Like, I don't think he's saying all cops are good, but I think he believes in the system of a police officer, which is an interesting avenue for an African-American filmmaker, and particularly at the time, and particularly someone who's so known with blaxploitation. So I think he's kind of appropriate for Super Cops, and any other director couldn't have done it as well as him, particularly because he has a real energy and kind of a gritty 70s-ness to it that it really works in Brooklyn, New York at the time, and really highlights kind of the area and kind of the attitudes of the time, while also trying to be very positive and so forth. Gordon Parks within those theories works very well for it. You know, I think it is odd because when I think of 70s films, I think of cynical and a darker nature and existentialism and things. I don't think of a film like this, and it's almost like his sensibilities worked perfectly with this story, which a lot of people say the reason this was optioned is because Serpico had come out like a year before, and the idea that this really popular, apparently was a write-up in the New York Times, or New Yorker magazine, or New York Times magazine. Anyway, it was a magazine in New York, doesn't matter. But it was a big deal, and then there was a book written by L.H. Whitmore, and it was a bidding war, and then he got it, and I guess he was a hot director at the time. He had done 2 Shaft films that were both very successful, and this isn't like Serpico at all. In fact, I think it's probably a little more rewatchable than Serpico. Serpico is a really good movie, and probably a better movie than this, but I think I would probably put this on randomly more than Serpico. You know, not that neither of these films play a lot on TV nowadays, but you know what I'm saying. It's just like there's a real rewatchability in Super Cops, and the fun with this. They have that, particularly they're called Batman and Robin, and it has that kind of feel to it, and it has some Batman connections, at least to the Batman TV show. Pat Hingle, who played Commissioner Gordon in the Batman show, is the police commissioner in this. Lorenzo Semple Jr. also wrote for the Batman show, and they even have sort of references to that show in this, which is odd. You definitely notice Pat Hingle because he's very recognizable, but to have a writer on it as well is kind of very interesting. I like the positivity to it. There's some really cool action sequences, particularly a scene when they're in a house and then a wrecking ball comes through the house, so they're trying to get these 2 criminals, and then they ride the wrecking ball down, which you can see in the poster. And it has a real fun, like, kind of positive vibe to it, which isn't really known for the period, to be honest, but Gordon Parks does that in a really cool action movie way, which shows he can handle kind of anything and use a very cinema verite style to do that. I don't think the 70s and even the 80s, unless you get a very strong director, are known for mixing action with interesting direction. Most action is more of a studio thing, and Gordon Parks was able to kind of elevate this kind of a film while also directing it in a really amazing way, directing it in a really auteur way, giving it a certain perspective to it that I think most directors wouldn't even really try to do. If a normal director did Super Cops, we probably wouldn't be talking about it and wouldn't have influenced anything. And Edgar Wright talks about watching this as a 7-year-old, and it really made an impression on him, and when you rewatched it when he was writing Hot Fuzz, he noticed how good it was. And I think it can play to the inner 7-year-old in you, but it can also play as someone who just wants to see a fun cops doing good type of movie. It plays excellently well. In fact, it kind of plays in a Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid way, but it plays so positively. I don't think you take it as seriously, but it surprises you in such a way that you're kind of overtaken a little bit by its extreme positivity. One of the better things about it is the 2 lead performances. Ron Liebman, who Edgar Wright also notice I'm mentioning Edgar Wright a lot in this, and I agree. Both the performances of Ron Liebman and David Selby do really good jobs in this film. Ron Liebman is a standout, and Edgar Wright likes him a lot more than I do, but I still think he does a really good job. And I was like, who was this? Like, what happened to this actor? He seems like he has such charisma. He has kind of an unhingedness to him. And then I looked him up and I like Googled, like, what's he look like now? And I'm like, wait a minute, that's Rachel's dad from Friends, the guy who got mad at Ross because Ross tried to tip because he doesn't tip and made him pay for dinner at an expensive restaurant. That's crazy. It's kind of interesting sometimes when you see an actor who didn't really know their history and you're like, oh my god, they're like, I suddenly respect them a lot more, and then you feel like maybe I should just respect people anyway, but that's a whole different thing. I really liked him in this a lot. It kind of makes me wish I know he had more supporting roles in 70s films and such apparently, and he's done sitcom stuff in The Sopranos. He does a really good job in this, and he really embodies the kind of flow of this film very well, as well as David Selby, who is probably the prettier one. He's Robin, and Ron Liebman is Batman, supposedly, and Ron Liebman's character is actually wearing a Batman shirt. And you see documentary footage of the real guys at the beginning, and he was actually at a press conference wearing a Batman shirt, which is like bizarre. It's a cool Batman shirt though. They really make this film, and then if they didn't have the charisma they do, it's certainly a thing when you have two guys in a buddy film. If they don't have great charisma, the films aren't gonna work. And whether they hate each other off screen or not, I don't know. I'm not trying to gossip or something. If it's actually good on screen, the film will work. Because of that, this film really has a lot going for it because of their two performances. Also, Sheila Fraser and Pat Hingle, who I already mentioned, and Amy Freeman and Dan Fraser are also very good in this film. I also really like the score, and you can find pieces of the score from Jerry Fielding on YouTube, and I really recommend it. It's very 70s, early 70s kind of score, and he did a lot of 70s action films, but he did a good job on this score, and he's a pretty good film composer. And I just recommend, if you're kind of down for some kind of action 70s stuff while you clean the apartment or your house or whatever, you should help your mom out if you're younger or something, then you should put this on and feel like you're, you know, a total badass while you wet Swiffer the apartment or something. Super Cops is probably, in terms of cult films, is an odd find because it's not the typical thing from the period. It's not the typical thing from this director or this kind of a story or a decade or whatever, but it's fun. It's a fun kind of thrill of a movie. You can see an influence on Hot Fuzz. It's kind of interesting when you have directors like Edgar Wright and Tarantino who turn you on to these weirder kind of cinephile finds that were only made in this certain way once and then sort of never again. You could probably see something like this in the 80s, but not shot in this way, not with this much fun. I think Gordon Parks really makes this movie into a really fun, kind of like almost a comic book of a fun movie. It's very kind of disposable and digestible, but like once it goes in and out, you were really pleasantly happy it was there when it was there. Most fun 70s films feel a little like out of place and don't necessarily work, and Gordon Parks really directs this very well. Certainly, I guess I am being cynical about it respecting the institution of police officers, but as negative as sometimes we can be about police officers, I think there are some good cops out there, and these guys did do a lot of good at the time, and they were a little overzealous and so forth, but I think this gets into their overzealous nature and does it in such a wonderful cinema verite style, almost documentary in a way, while also having this kind of fun comic booky vibe. It's just such an interesting, well-made kind of fun movie, and you don't get a lot of interesting, well-made fun movies in the age before blockbusters. So I definitely recommend Super Cops if you're not as into the 70s, but you'd like to watch a really fun 90 minutes and just be like, oh, okay, I feel good about life, and hey, Batman and Robin, these two cool cops. Super Cops is a great movie for that, and especially if you like the kind of attitude of Hot Fuzz, but obviously it's not as funny as Hot Fuzz, but it's probably just as thrilling, and see a film that Edgar Wright likes a lot. And I try to go with his picks sometimes because he always puts me in interesting directions, and maybe this isn't the deepest movie or the most interesting cult movie to review on my channel or anything, but it's definitely one that's a lot of fun, and you can find it pretty easily online. I've noticed it pops up free on YouTube sometimes. It's on Amazon Prime. I think you gotta pay for it or something. I guarantee if you see it, you won't be disappointed. You'll have a good time, and sometimes it's fun to just watch two people have a good time fighting crime and being really in love with it, and actually have it be directed in a cool way. I think if you want all that, Super Cops will not disappoint you and bring a smile to your face in a way that I think most early 70s films will not. So if you have seen the Super Cops and would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.